I want to take some time today to speak into not knowing what you should be doing with your life, not knowing what you should be doing on a day-to-day basis. This is something that's pretty close to home for me because I've been feeling this way, honestly, since my teenage years. I had a pretty unique teenage years because instead of going to high school and doing that whole thing, I just dropped out really young, basically did no high school, and immediately just started bumming around and getting high and doing whatever I wanted. And I really didn't follow any of the traditional avenues that you're meant to follow, right? I was one of those kids that just fell through the cracks, and because of that, I had a lot of freedom to explore whatever I wanted, and most of that was just stuff that was harming me. I didn't realize that at the time, but most of that was stuff that was harming me. And because I guess I had, by the way, I'm sorry, it's burning hot here today in Melbourne, so you'll have to deal with me intermittently blotching my head with an old stinky t-shirt that's on my bed. But anyway, I had a lot of freedom when I was younger to do what I wanted in those years. And because of that, I think I exhausted a lot of drives that a lot of people around me only had reserved for like weekends or like the occasional weekend. They would like sneak out and get drunk and get high or play video games all weekend, where for me, I played video games all day, every day, got high every day, and, would just try to hang out with girls after they finished school and just basically did that kind of thing when I was younger. I was really just bumming around in my teenage years. And because I did that for a few years, I exhausted all those drives. And I guess I started thinking more about what it was that I'd actually like to do in my time, And I would try out all these different things and they would satisfy me for a little bit. They would bring me a little bit of fulfillment for a while, maybe even a year or two. But I would often have this background sense of just, I don't really know what I should be doing. It's not that I felt like there was some morally right thing that someone should be doing, but in my mind, even to this day, it's not like a moral thing, like wrong or right. It's more of just a sense of like what would be the ideal way for me to live my life and what is like a high quality way for me to live my life, And I would deal with that a lot even back then, but it was more muted back then, I think. And as I've gotten into my 20s, I'm 26 now, so as I've went through my 20s, I've always kind of pursued the thing that I want to the most, and I've been very lucky given the fact that I don't have any high school experience. I've been very lucky to land on my feet, and I've always managed to pretty much do the things that I've wanted to do and follow follow the life path that I've wanted to follow for the most part. Nothing glamorous, but I've always sort of done the thing that I've wanted to do the most. But there are lots of times where I guess I do find myself webbed up in that feeling of I don't really know what the right thing to do is, And it's interesting because this feeling of not really knowing what the right thing to do is, this is like my pet theory on it, but I think that it's a very deeply rooted underlying feeling that has to do with our survival. And I think because it's so deeply underlying everything else, I think it starts to get mixed up and blended with a lot of like the regular like irritations or dissatisfactions of everyday life. And then I think that when they get blended up, we start to question if our whole life is like a not really working or everything's a miserable failure. Like I go through phases like that sometimes where I just feel like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Like last year, I pretty much just spent last year backpacking around Asia, only Japan actually, backpacking around Japan, meeting different people, working on like my social skills is the nice way I like to say it, but really that just means like dating different people and like hanging out with people that I wouldn't usually hang out with friends wise. And that was really fun in a lot of ways, and I felt like I needed to do that. All I was really called to do was do that, and then like take pictures and make the occasional YouTube video. I'm making YouTube videos more consistently nowadays than earlier last year, but I guess like although that was fun, there were periods where I was just thinking like, what the fuck am I doing? You know, like, is this really leading anywhere? And I'd get really unsettled sometimes, you know, and I think something that's always been pretty difficult for me about this stuff is I look around me and I think like, is anyone around me? Like, there's not really much guidance around me, you know, like my parents live a very, they live a very like mediocre kind of existence. So I don't feel like there's anything that's really specifically showing me that there's much more, you know. I have a fantastic mentor, and seeing him, and then I have a couple of friends who are like, you know, we put in the effort together to get the things that we want. I can see that, but when it comes down to it, a lot of the time, really, I would just feel like, what the hell am I really doing, you know? And for me, after a while, with that kind of feeling and that kind of thinking, what it seems to just get to is it gets to this sense of like, I just need to do fucking something, you know, the thing that's most resonant at the time. And that might be go backpacking. That might just be honestly what it is at the time. And it's easy enough to be like, no, well, it must be nice to do that, but I have all these responsibilities, and like be a victim about things. But like the truth is, if you really want to do something, if you really need to do something, you can't blame other people for not following that thing. You feel me? Like you can't just like make it, you can't project that out onto the world forever, because I think that's just like, even for me, like being confused a lot about my life, like that to me is like such obvious projection. That's just like choosing suffering in my mind. So you just sort of have to pick the thing that makes the most sense for you to do a lot of the time, I think. And I will say that I think when you pick the thing that makes the most sense for you to do, and you just follow it for a bit, what I used to think was eventually I'll find my thing. And maybe I'm just like too young and too inexperienced to have found that yet, but what I've realized so far at least is I don't think there ever really is a thing, but I think you find different pieces of the puzzle over time, and you like fulfill different drives. And I think that starts to give you a clearer view of your person and the world in which you live, and how people work, and how you as a self works. Yourself works over time, you know? It's like, instead of finding that one thing that solves all your problems, you start realizing that the problem is actually of a more complex nature, but you find different pieces of the puzzle as you go along. And by following that thing inside of you that tells you that this is the right thing, very few people have the courage to actually do that, I think, a lot of the time. I think actually you can tell when someone's really following the thing that makes the most sense to them and is meaningful to them, because they have this like aliveness in their presence. Where people who are just doing what they think they should be doing, they don't necessarily have that same level of aliveness, just in my experience. I think there's something that sort of shines through someone who's doing the thing that they really feel like they want to do and they should be doing. Excuse me. And that, it's tricky, because that thing that you feel like you want to do, or that's most energizing to you or most authentic to you, it's hard, because sometimes you would hope that it would be something that sorts out your survival needs. You know, like you would hope that the thing you're most passionate about would lead to money, or that would lead to you securing a better mate, or like gaining social status or social proof. But that's not always the case, right? Sometimes you have to follow a certain thing and it doesn't even make any fucking sense to you why you're following that thing, but it somehow seems right, and it's disingenuous at some level to discard that. And that could be something as simple as like someone randomly happens to buy you some book, or you go across like a book yard sale or something. I'm just using this weird example. And you read a little bit of it and you're like, wow, I feel like strangely this was meant to come into my life right now, and there's like something in this and I don't really know why that is, but I feel like I have to follow it. It's like you have this intuition or this hunch about this thing. And I think there's something really powerful about that, because I feel like when you have a hunch, or when you have like a sort of more of like a heart level connection to something, even if you can't piece it, you can't place it yet, I feel like when you follow that thing can often reveal a lot to you, because I think it's something that's part of your lifeline. You know, it's not just part of the things that you feel like you should be doing. It might not even be a smart choice, but it's like something you somehow need in your life. You need in your experience, right? And like I said, that can come from some random book, or like some video that you watch, or like some a friend, or like, you know, I feel like we get these clues and we don't always know how to listen to them. And I think that by listening to those, we start to put together the puzzle in the way that we need to. But a couple things about this that I think are important to mention. Okay, so here's one that I think is really important to understand. The thing that presents itself to you, or when you're following that hunch, when you're moving in that direction that's most truthful to you, as you start doing that, you can sometimes assume that that thing should make you feel good. And from my experience, what I've learned is that that's not always the case at all. Actually, sometimes the thing that makes the most sense to you, or the thing that you know you need to do at some gut level, does not actually feel good to you, at least not in the immediate sense. It's like, reminds me of like a elongated version of the research of flow. If you've ever read anything about flow, like flow is the Vesica-Pisces state of consciousness that comes between anxiety and ease. So it's like too far, you're like worried about the thing, and then too far on one end, you're like, it's too easy. So flow is like that competence, challenge, ease, challenge balance that you find. There's a fantastic book called Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I've read it like 3 times because I think it's a phenomenal book on this topic. With the research on flow, they've actually found that norepinephrine precedes dopamine in a flow state in the brain. And the reason I say what I'm trying to put forth here is an elongated version of that is because sometimes I think you get into something and you follow it and it doesn't actually bear the fruit of positive emotion for a while. Sometimes it does. Sometimes just knowing and following that is the positive emotion, or sometimes you read that book and you enjoy reading that book or whatever, right? But sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes you just need to follow this thing and you're not really sure why. Like, you just kind of have to go down that avenue. But that doesn't mean you should quit just because it's challenging, or just because there's something difficult there. Like, if you feel like there's something that could be beneficial to you, or that just clicks for you at some level, I feel you should still follow it, even if it doesn't really pay off emotionally right away. Another thing is that it's like another assumption where sometimes you can think, oh, people around me will kind of get why I'm doing this, right? They'll be able to figure it out. And it's like, no, probably not. Like, most people are definitely not following their like most authentic self. Like, I'm sure they'd like to post selfies about them on Instagram saying they are doing that, but my experience with people is usually they're not living in that way. So if you share this with people around you, like friends and family, or like even your partner sometimes, you might assume that they would be like, oh yeah, I get why you're doing that, that's amazing. But oftentimes people aren't. Oftentimes people are like, what the fuck? Like, why would you do that? that's silly. Or like, oh, well, you know, sometimes actually like people get defensive and they'll be like passive aggressive. They'll be like, oh, that's great for you. And be like, I guess for me, like, I just have to have a more responsible life than that.
Yeah.
You know, like when people do shit like that, like you tell them something and they're like, yeah, no, it must be nice to have the free time to do that. But you can tell there's like a cunty energy behind it. Like they're being a bit cunty, like, but it's like just, it's because they kind of like have this sense of like, I can't do that thing. So yeah, people won't always support you in it either. Or on top of that, the thing that it is might be really surprising and really strange to you. Like, I think I said in a recent video, the one I made about not knowing, my housemate is like fucking juggling pots and pans. Like, this guy, every time he makes like food, he has to like juggle the pots and pans. That's what it sounds like. He's like, it's like, bro. I think I said in a recent video about how like I'm following like a Zen Buddhist practice right now. And when I think about it on the surface is like, I don't know why I'm doing that. You know, like, it's funny, like, there are things I could say that are positive about it, but I don't really fully know why it is that I'm interested in that. I just know that it's the most resonant thing for me to practice. It just makes sense to me at some level. I couldn't tell you exactly why, and as soon as I tried to, if I started like analyzing all of the like Zen text, like I do read about Zen and things, but it's like, it's not really about that for me. I want to actually experience it. And to be honest, if there was any reason, that's pretty much why. I think Zen is one of the traditions in life that actually emphasizes trusting and immersing yourself within your direct experience rather than than hearsay, than secondhand opinion, right? So sometimes you don't really know why you need to move in a certain direction, but there's just something about it and you just are into that, you know? I think bringing it back, it's natural to feel like you're not really sure what you're doing when you're honest with yourself. I think we get so caught up in living in our conceptual world and in our conceptual bubbles that we just start thinking like, oh yeah, like I know what I'm doing, I know how things work, I know who I am. And it's like, if your life is so certain, it's definitely a hollow kind of life, you know? There has to be some mystery and uncertainty and not knowing in your experience, right? At some level, like you have to be open to not really knowing, or to being honest about the fact that you don't really know. At least I think so. I think it's important to recognize that sometimes you're not really going to know what you're doing, or what you're doing next, and how it's going to happen. And I think it's difficult for us sometimes to just sit in that uncertainty and not really fully knowing what that is. But I also think it pays dividends, because when we sit patiently in that, even though we might have to do some things to survive, like for me, like I'm working, you know, I actually like the job that I work, and I do the one-on-one coaching with people, and that's good. It helps me pay the bills and whatever. But sometimes you just kind of are in your situation and like moving forth with what makes most sense to you at the time, and that's like what it is. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it can definitely be uncomfortable sometimes. There are some thoughts and feelings about that. If you relate to this or you got value out of this and you haven't already, I appreciate you subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing this with anyone you feel like might get value out of it. Commenting for the algorithm. My email is down below, blah, blah, blah. I hope you're having a beautiful day. I hope wherever you are in the world, you're not melting like an ice cream like me. Like I'm just like melting in this heat. So I'm just gonna, I'm reading Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami right now. I'm also reading Strangers to Ourselves by Rachel Aviv and Opening the Hand of Thought by Kosho Ushiyama. So they're my free books right now. I'm going to spend the rest of my Sunday evening cracking into those, and I'm going to write through my itinerary of the next week, because I like to do that on Sundays. And probably going to get an early-ish sort of night. There's a bunch of unneeded information about my evening. Hope you're having a beautiful day, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.